Ladies and gentlemen, the finale of Stranger Things is out. 10 years of Hawkins, the upside down, and friendships that basically defined an era of television. An era has ended. For a lot of people, this story has always been about nostalgia, friendship, and surviving monsters. But today, I want to talk about Lucas Sinclair. Not Mike in the group, Lucas in the group. Because Lucas has always been there from the very first episode. And yet, for some reason, he's consistently treated like he's on the outside looking in, especially by the fandom. So with all the conversations happening now that the show has ended, I think this is the right moment to slow down and really look at how Lucas was written, how he was perceived, and how race shaped the way his character and the actor who plays him, Caleb McLaughlin, was received over the years. Lucas is one of my favorite characters, and that's exactly why I've paid close attention to him. Not because I want to defend him blindly, but because when you watch closely, patterns start to emerge. Patterns in storytelling, in fandom reactions, and in the way black characters are often allowed to exist in genre shows. And by the end of this video, I want to ask one question. What does Stranger Things' treatment of Lucas Sinclair ultimately say about the show as a whole? Lucas Sinclair is the only black member of the original friend group, and the only person of color among the core kids. That fact alone already shapes his experience in ways the show sometimes acknowledges and sometimes seems uncomfortable sitting with. That doesn't mean the other kids don't face struggles. Will, for example, he grows up queer in the 1980s, which is something the show gradually explores. Dustin lives with a genetic condition that makes him a target for bullying. And these things matter, and they're a part of why the group connects with each other in the first place, besides their shared interest for Dungeons and Dragons, of course. But race operates differently. Lucas doesn't get to take his identity off at the end of the day, and neither does Caleb McLaughlin. And while Stranger Things is a supernatural show, it's still set in a very real, very white, very 1980s small town, and that context matters, whether the show fully engages with it or not. From the very first season, Lucas was labeled by a lot of viewers as the mean one. And most of the time when people explain why they didn't like him, it always comes back to how he treated Eleven at the beginning. But when you actually look at the situation, Lucas' reaction makes sense. I mean, a young girl shows up in the woods alone with a shaved head, no shoes, and no explanation during a time when strange and dangerous things are already happening. Yeah, being cautious in that situation is completely normal. That's survival, actually. Because we have to see it from that perspective. I mean, Lucas isn't rejecting Eleven as a person, but he's questioning a situation that doesn't add up. And to be honest, in any other story, that kind of realism would probably be framed as intelligence. Instead, it became the reason people decided he was unlikable. But what makes this frustrating is the double standard. Look at season 2, Mike treats Max with open hostility when she joins the group. And that behavior wasn't held against him in the long term, but Lucas being cautious in season 1 becomes his permanent label. This naturally leads to the question who Lucas truly is, right? What is he really like? At his core, I would say Lucas is practical. You know, he's logical, he doesn't immediately believe in conspiracies or supernatural explanations, as seen in earlier seasons, but I don't think it's because he's closed-minded, but more because he simply needs proof. And that's what makes his arc so interesting. Over time, Lucas becomes one of the most emotionally grounded characters in the group. Not only is he loyal, but he's also protective, and he's deeply empathetic, especially when it comes to Max, his on and off girlfriend. Whether it's standing up for his friends, even when it puts him in danger, or staying by Max's side through unimaginable trauma, Lucas consistently shows up, quietly without spectacle. And still, despite all of this, he doesn't receive the same emotional focus from some of the fandom as other characters do. Everything I've mentioned so far speaks to Lucas' character, but when you look closely at the series itself, it becomes clear that Lucas is also the character who most directly experiences racism within the story. One of the clearest examples happens in season 2 through Billy Hargrove, Max's older stepbrother. Billy makes it very clear that he doesn't want Max hanging around what he calls certain people.
I'm older than you, and something you learn is that there are certain type of people in this world that you stay away from.
The show never has him say the word outright, but the implication isn't subtle. And later in the season, that implication turns into violence when Billy physically attacks Lucas, a middle schooler, purely out of racial hostility. That moment matters so much, not just because it's shocking, but because of how real it feels. Stranger Things may be a supernatural show, but this kind of racism isn't fictional. This is grounded, it's recognizable, and uncomfortable in a way monsters aren't. What's difficult to sit with is how parts of the fandom responded to this. I mean, Billy's death in season 3 is often met with sympathy and grief. And I get it, he sacrificed himself for Max and Al. But Lucas' experience with racism is rarely given the same weight, and he was a child too. And that imbalance is quite telling. Like, let's talk about this. And also, I want to mention that this is not a critique of Zachary Montgomery, who portrayed Billy. In fact, he reportedly refused to say the N-word in an early draft of the script, which is respectful of him. But at the same time, it's understandable why the Duffer Brothers considered including the word, because Hawkins in the 1980s, as a predominantly white small town, would not have been free of explicit racism, if we're being real right now. When I first watched the scene where Billy attacks Lucas, it genuinely stayed with me. Even as a younger viewer, it felt familiar. Not because I had seen it on television before, but because experiences like that exist in real life. And that's what makes the moment so powerful. Max stepping in to protect Lucas in that scene is one of the few times the show allows someone else to visibly stand between him and racial violence. It's important, but it also highlights how rarely Lucas is given space to be vulnerable about what he's experiencing. Sadly, this isn't the only time the series shows racism towards Lucas. Back in season 1, one of the bullies calls him Midnight, directly mocking his skin color. And yes, the other boys are bullied too, but this is slightly different. This is racialized. It's not about being a nerd, it's about being black. And it raises a question the show never fully answers. If Lucas were white, would his experience have looked the same? Because let's look at it from a different perspective. He's athletic, charismatic, practical, traits that are usually rewarded, but race changes how those traits are read. There's also the Ghostbusters moment, where Mike is offended that Lucas doesn't want to go as Winston, the only black member of the team. Lucas clocks it immediately, and his response is quick and sharp.
Then you be Winston.
I can't!
Why not?
Because you're not black? I didn't say that!
You thought it.
I don't think Mike intended harm in that moment, but intent does not erase implication, and Lucas is often the only one in the group who has to notice those things. By season 4, Lucas is no longer bullied, at least not openly. He's popular, he's on the basketball team, and he's finally receiving some form of social protection. But that shift comes at a cost. Lucas suppresses his interests, especially D&D, in order to survive in that space. And while the show frames this as a personal conflict, it also reflects something deeper. Years of being targeted, isolated, and othered will eventually wear you down. His friends struggle to understand this. Not because they don't care, but because they don't experience the same pressures. And this is where I think the show could have gone further. We rarely see Lucas's vulnerability around racism met with the same emotional support that other characters receive for their struggles. Dustin is comforted by Nancy in season 2 when no girl wants to dance with him. Or Will is emotionally supported by his friends for coming out as gay in season 5. It would have been powerful to see a vulnerable moment of Lucas dealing with racism. To better understand Lucas's experience, I also want to talk briefly about Erica Sinclair, his younger sister. Erica is introduced in season 2 as bold, witty, outspoken, and clearly very intelligent. Over time, she becomes a fan favorite, especially because she's confident and doesn't hesitate to challenge anyone around her. On the surface, that looks like strong representation, right? But when you look a little closer, Erica is often positioned as a counterexample to Lucas. Where Lucas is cautious and emotionally grounded, Erica is written to be sharp, sarcastic, and almost untouchable. She's allowed to be smart and confident, but rarely vulnerable. That's where familiar tropes start to appear. Erica fits neatly into the smart black girl and at times the strong black woman archetype, even though she's a child. And while strength and intelligence aren't negative traits, they can become limiting when they're the only traits a character is allowed to show. What's striking is how rarely the show lets Erica sit with fear, softness, or emotional hurt, especially considering the setting. Hawkins is a predominantly white town in the 1980s. A young black girl who's confident, outspoken, and visibly intelligent would realistically face hostility. But that experience is almost never shown. It isn't until season 4 and season 5 that we finally see cracks in that armor. Moments where Erica is visibly shaken, scared, or emotionally affected by what's happening to Lucas and Max. Those glimpses are powerful precisely because they're so rare. And this matters for Lucas' story too. Because while the show gestures toward racism through him, it avoids letting either sibling fully articulate that experience together. We never really see Lucas and Erica talk about race, fear, or survival, even though both of them would be carrying it in different ways. Erica isn't a bad character. Most of us like her. She's a compelling one, but the way she's written reflects a larger discomfort the show seems to have, which is allowing black characters to be complex, vulnerable, and emotionally centered without immediately shielding them behind toughness or humor. Okay, so now I want to expand from text to audience. Up to this point, I've been talking about Lucas as a character, but none of this exists in a vacuum. Because behind Lucas is Caleb McLaughlin, the actor who brought him to life. He made his Broadway debut as young Simba in The Lion King, a role that requires vocal control and emotional presence, especially for a child performer. That kind of background matters because it means Caleb didn't stumble into Stranger Things by chance. He was trained. When Stranger Things premiered in 2016, Caleb was around 14 years old, and from the very beginning, Lucas was written as the most grounded member of the group, as mentioned already. Skeptical when others were idealistic, practical when others panicked. That grounding works because of Caleb's performance. He plays Lucas with so much depth, but it still goes unnoticed because it isn't flashy. And the way the fandom has treated Caleb over the years makes it very hard to argue that the dislike toward Lucas was ever just about writing choices. Caleb has spoken openly about experiencing racism from fans during press tours, especially early in the show's success. In interviews, he's described people avoiding him, treating him differently, or saying hurtful things purely because of his race.
My very first Comic-Con, some people didn't stand on my line because I was black. Some people told me like, oh, I didn't want to be on the line, oh, because you were mean to 11. Even now, like some people don't follow me or don't support me because I'm black, you know? And even overseas, sometimes overseas, like you'll feel the racism, you feel the bigotry, and it's something sometimes you can't really, it's hard to talk about and for people to understand. But you know, when I was younger, it definitely affected me a lot because you're like, why? Like, this is a deep conversation right now, but like, why am I least amount of followers? I'm on the same show as everybody from season 1. But then, you know, my parents had to be like, it's a sad truth, but it's because you're the black child on the show. I'm like, wow, that's great.
And this wasn't happening to an adult, as we see him now. It was happening to a teenager. Being the only black kid among the main cast, traveling internationally and suddenly becoming famous, while also being made to feel unwelcome, clearly took a toll on him, and that kind of honesty shouldn't be brushed off or minimized. When people say that Lucas is imagined as being treated differently, I always think about this. Because what Caleb describes isn't abstract. It's a direct reflection of how fandoms can project their biases onto characters and the people who play them. Even now, you can see traces of this pattern in how the cast is received publicly. On Instagram, Caleb has consistently had the lowest following among the original main cast, even compared to actors who joined the show later. On its own, that might not mean much, but taken alongside the backlash, the dismissal, and the way Lucas has been discussed over the years, it becomes part of a larger picture. And it doesn't stop with numbers. During season 5, some fans fixated on Lucas's hair, making jokes, creating memes, and treating it like a punchline. What makes that particularly frustrating is the context. In the story, Lucas is carrying immense emotional weight. His girlfriend is in a coma, he's navigating grief, fear, and responsibility, and Caleb delivers one of the strongest performances of the series during this time. And all we do is make fun of the hair? What? This even extends into interviews where Caleb has been asked questions that border on mockery.
Who's wearing a wig? Whose hair is real? Was that your hair?
What does it look like to you?
I mean...
Be honest.
I want to say, okay, if I'm going to guess, I'm going to say that was not your hair.
Yes, it wasn't. By the laugh, I could tell that you didn't think it was my hair. You're like, it was a wig. No.
Questions that none of his white co-stars were subjected to in the same way. None of this is accidental. When a character is constantly scrutinized more harshly and the actor playing them is treated with less grace, it's worth asking why. Caleb McLaughlin has consistently shown professionalism, talent, and emotional range throughout Stranger Things. His performance in seasons 4 and 5 in particular are some of the most grounded and affecting in the entire show, and yet he's often discussed last, defended least, and reduced most. That disconnect tells us something important. Not just about fandom behavior, but about whose stories and performances are considered worthy of protection. But before we talk about the finale, we need to zoom all the way out. Do you remember? Before the finale dropped, there was a lot of speculation about who wouldn't make it. That's normal for a show like Stranger Things. You know, high stakes, final season, nothing feels guaranteed. We saw theories about Dustin, about Steve, even about Eleven. But one name kept coming up consistently, Lucas. And that repetition really stood out to me, because when people explained why they were worried about Lucas, it wasn't really tied to specific narrative clues. Well, maybe some, but most weren't. It wasn't about foreshadowing or dialogue or plot mechanics. It was more of a feeling, an expectation. Even I was a victim to it. But that kind of fear doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from history. And this isn't about accusing the writers of intent, but we do recognize patterns that have repeated themselves across the genre television for decades, often unconsciously. In sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, Black characters are frequently written as loyal, grounding, emotionally intelligent figures. The one who sees danger clearly. But when stories want to signal consequence, when they want a loss to feel meaningful, those same characters are often positioned as expandable because narratives have historically treated their survival as optional. Over time, audiences naturally internalize that pattern. So when a Black character like Lucas enters the final season, especially as the emotional backbone of someone else's story, fear sets in. This is what we can call a pattern recognition. This is why Lucas was so frequently mentioned in pre-finale death theories. Not because the show told us he would die, but because genre history taught audiences to expect it. And we have to remember that Stranger Things operates inside a nostalgic framework, one that both celebrates and critiques the 1980s. But nostalgia isn't neutral, and the 80s weren't either, especially when it came to race. So the anxiety surrounding Lucas before the finale wasn't a mistrust of the Duffers. It was a reflection of cultural memory. About having seen this story play out again and again and again, even in shows that claim to be progressive, inclusive, or subversive. Which is why the finale's treatment of Lucas mattered so deeply. Because no ending exists in isolation. Every choice carries the weight of what has come before it. So, with that context in mind, let's talk about the finale. What does all of this say about Stranger Things as a whole? I think that the finale makes obvious that the show ultimately chose comfort over confrontation. After an entire season, really after years of building suspense around Vecna or the Mind Flayer, danger, and irreversible consequences, the ending resolves almost everything with surprising ease. No definite main character deaths, no lasting physical consequences. Even Eleven's fate, while uncertain, is quickly reassured by the group themselves. The message is easy to decode. Everyone makes it out. And while there's something refreshing about a happy ending in a time where tragedy has become the default, it's hard to ignore how abrupt that shift feels, especially when Season 4 and the first half of Season 5 spent so much time telling us to brace ourselves. Vecna, or the Mind Flayer, was positioned as the most psychologically complex and threatening antagonist the show ever introduced, is defeated far more easily than expected. There's no extended reckoning, no true one-on-one confrontation that matches the weight of the build-up. Will's connection to Vecna, something the show repeatedly asks us to pay close attention to, is barely utilized in the end. The result is a finale that feels emotionally safe but narratively restrained. It's almost cautious. And yet one creative choice reframes everything, the reveal of the Stranger Things manual. That moment suggests that the entire series functions like a long-form role-playing campaign, a Dungeons & Dragons game brought to life. When you look back, it actually kind of tracks. Mike has always been the dungeon master. He's the strategist, the storyteller, the one running the campaigns. In the very first episode, he even jokes, "I didn't know it would take 10 hours, do you remember?" And suddenly that line feels almost prophetic. If Stranger Things is a game, then the story we watched from Season 1 to Season 5 may be the visualization of that campaign, imagined, played out, and ultimately concluded by its creator. That reading helps explain the optimistic ending. In a game, especially one rooted in friendship, you don't always want to punish your players, right? Sometimes you let them win. Seen through that lens, the happy ending makes sense. But it also explains why certain arcs feel unresolved, because games prioritize completion over interrogation, resolution over realism. And this brings us back to Lucas. In a story that ultimately chooses harmony, characters who already sit at the margins of narrative protection are more likely to be sidelined than centered. Yes, Lucas survives, and that is important, but his journey doesn't receive the same sense of culmination as others. Not because he's unimportant, but because the story's final priority isn't balance. It's closure. Stranger Things wants to be progressive, nostalgic, and comforting all at once, and for the most part, it succeeds. But those goals sometimes conflict. Challenging old patterns requires sitting with discomfort. Choosing nostalgia often means smoothing things over. The finale shows us which impulse won. Still, despite my criticism, I'm grateful for this show. For 10 years, Stranger Things gave us mystery, imagination, and a world we kept returning to. We watched these characters grow up, and in a small way, we grew alongside them. The final image, the core group back in the basement playing a role-playing game, mirrors exactly where it all began. And maybe that's the most honest ending the show could give us. 10 years of Stranger Things. It's been an honor watching this cast grow, and I have no doubt they'll all go on to land incredible roles and absolutely deliver in whatever comes next. Thank you for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, feel free to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts, respectfully, in the comments. And with that, peace.